Hello and welcome to the FatBoss Guide to Kilrogg Deadeye.
Yes, this fight is all about ad management. Yay! We all love ad management. It's super fun. Kill the ads and then the boss will eventually die.
For this encounter you want to bring 2 tanks, probably 1 healer a group and a mixed DPS makeup. However, you do not want too many melee because there are various ads that spawn in range that you need to deal with.
Now speaking of ads, we might as well get straight into them and let's talk about the salivating Bloodthirsters. Now these guys will spawn on either sides of the room and start travelling towards the pool of blood near the boss. Now you can slow these ads, and to be honest you really want to, because if they do reach the bloody pool area, they will transform into a new ad called the Hulking Terrors, and these ones are pretty fucking savage.
Now one of the Bloodthirsters will always spawn above the pool, and it will land immediately inside it, so you'll always have a Hulking Terror regardless, so you need to know how they work. Now these Hulking Terrors will apply something called Fel Corruption to players, and this is displayed on an extra action bar. All this Fel Corruption does is just ticking damage to you, and the higher corruption you have, the more damage you'll take. If your corruption goes to 100, you'll be mind controlled and you'll probably wipe your raid. So it's important that you keep an eye on how much you have. Do know that Fel Corruption slowly drops off you. However, healers can also take it off you, which we'll explain in a little while. Now these Hulking Terrors melee attacks actually apply Fel Corruption. To tanks you're going to get quite a lot. They also have a frontal cone that you need to make sure you face from the raid, but their most important ability is something called Rendering Howl. This does an absolutely absurd amount of damage to the raid over a 10-second period, and is probably the thing that will wipe you. You need to make sure that you interrupt this cast. However, every time you interrupt this cast, his next cast is 50% faster, so it's very important this ad dies really quick. Otherwise you just won't be able to interrupt this cast and you'll wipe.
Now when the Hulking Terror finally dies, it will explode, dealing damage to anyone in 10 yards and also giving them Fel Corruption. It's not 100% necessary to drag this ad away from everyone when it dies, just make sure that only 1 tank is going to be hit by the explosion, as their Fel Corruption is always going to be higher than everyone else's and you don't want to give them extra Fel Corruption. You also want to make sure tanks that you are taking turns tanking this Hulking Terrors so you can keep your Fel Corruption fairly low.
So apart from those 2 ads, let's move on to Kilrogg. He'll cast Shred Armor on your tanks. You just need to make sure that you have your active mitigation up when this cast comes in, otherwise you'll receive a nasty damage taken increase for 30 seconds. But one of his main abilities you need to deal with is Heartseeker. What the boss will do is target a player and put a debuff on them that lasts for 5 seconds. Once the 5 seconds are over, the boss will fire a projectile to them, and this projectile, just to keep in mind, does pierce through players and will affect all players that are hit, so it's kind of like the Mark of Death in the last phase of Blackhand. With this in mind, you need to make sure that there's a clear path between the boss and the affected player, just so multiple players don't get hit. When the player is hit, they'll receive a physical damage dot that lasts for 2 minutes, and they'll also leave a patch of blood on the floor that deals ticking damage if you stand inside it. But ultimately, the most important thing is that a blood globule will spawn, and will start travelling towards the boss. If the ad reaches the boss, the raid will just take a massive burst of AoE damage, which is really bad, so you need to swap to this ad as soon as it spawns, and just kill it off. The way that we set up our raid is that we have a group on the left, a group on the right, and whoever gets the Heartseeker debuff takes a Warlock portal or just runs into the middle of the room right at the back, so that there is a clear path and no one else is going to get hit.
Now if a player is hit by the Heartseeker and they have any of the Fel Corruption, instead of spawning a blood globule, they'll spawn a green Fel version. This one has far more health, so it is way more difficult to kill in time. If it does reach the boss, the raid will pretty much take twice as much damage as a normal blood, and the boss will heal for 15% of his max health. So that's pretty much a wipe. This shouldn't ever happen, as the melee and the tank should be the only one with Fel Corruptions, and they shouldn't be targeted by the Heartseeker. However, if you get in the way of the ability, a Fel Blood will spawn right on top of the boss. So merely just make sure you are not in the way of this Heartseeker when it is travelling out from the boss, otherwise you are going to flat out wipe the raid.
The boss on a set timer will also cast something called Death Throes. This is a cast that just deals ticking damage to the entire raid for 8 seconds. However, the closer you are to the boss, the more damage you take, so melee you're going to get a little bit battered from this. The boss will also spawn avoidable AoE circles underneath ranged players, and these deal pretty much lethal damage. If you get hit by these, you are screwed, so make sure you avoid them. Now every time the boss finishes one of these Death Throes casts, his next Death Throes deals even more damage, and this just stacks up for the rest of the fight. So by the time you get right to the end of the encounter, you're going to be taking way more damage from this ability than you did from right at the start. So healers, make sure you take this into account and save your healing cooldowns right towards the end of the encounter.
However, there is something that can help you heal up this damage, but let's be real, it's for the DPS.
Yeah, it's for the DPS.
It's something called Visions of Death. This is an 8-second cast that will spawn 3 runes in front of the boss. If you have a player stood in each rune, these players will be teleported to a new area. If no one is in the runes at all, the whole raid will take a massive AoE hit and no one will be put inside, and that's awful. So make sure you're inside them. In this new room, you have 3 different types of adds attacking you, and Khadgar, who pretty much sits there taking ticking damage, and you cannot heal him up. You'll get imps in there that will cast Fellblaze. That is a long caster. If it isn't interrupted, it will kill you, but these die super quick. They're like cannon fodder. They just fall over. You'll have fiends that will explode when they die, dealing damage to you and spawning AoE pools, so make sure you do know where they are when they die. And you'll also have mistresses that will cast a frontal cone breath, dealing ticking damage and applying a dot on you, so make sure you move from that as well. Each time you kill the adds inside this place, all 3 players will receive a buff that stacks up to 20. If you get a DPS, you'll get a 10% damage increase per stack, and if you're a healer, you'll get a 10% healing increase per stack. Now, you'll be kicked out of this area either when Khadgar dies or you die, and of course you want to be in there as long as possible, or at least until you get those 20 stacks. Now, because of this, we send in 2 good AoE DPS, so the adds die off quickly and you'll get stacks quickly, but we also send in 1 healer, so they can keep these DPS alive, because you do take a hell of a lot of damage in there if you're not careful with all of the abilities.
Now, if you really wanted to, you could just send in 3 DPS, but it's very unlikely that you'll reach the 20 stacks unless you play, like, amazingly. So just go with the 1 healer just to be safe. Now, after you've finished inside there and you are ported out, as a healer, you'll get something called Cleansing Aura. This is a circle around you that cleanses any fell corruption from players. So as soon as you leave this room, you pretty much want to go stand on top of the melee and tanks just to completely remove all the fell corruption they've gained from the Hulking Terrors. And when the DPS come out, because you have this 200% extra damage increase, you do the most absurd damage on all of the adds. So, like, as soon as any of the adds spawn, just switch to them and one-shot them while everyone else can just tunnel the boss. Do also note that you do get a debuff that prevents you from going back into their Visions of Death room for 90 seconds. This means that you do need to set up 2 groups of players to go inside. But ultimately, that's it. The fight actually gets easier as the fight goes on, especially if the people that you do send inside do manage to get those 20 stacks. It's almost a joke, because you can literally one-shot every single ad. It's just all about dealing with the Heartseekers properly, providing they don't spawn anywhere near the boss and only 1 glob spawns per time because only 1 person gets hit by it. It's not a difficult fight.
So thank you very much for watching, guys. If this guide did help you out, then make sure you leave us a like. It helps us out a lot, and we'll see you in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.